So in real life, for the most part, humans won't eat humans, but will eat just about anything else. And there isn't much to discuss unless you're going vegetarian or all meat. But then we want to play D&D, and humans aren't the only things that you aren't allowed to eat, and you start thinking about it. And there's quite a bit to consider. Starting with, I think, the most natural starting point, druids. It's editing me. I missed the opportunity to make natural intentional pun, and I'm a little disappointed in myself. Druids are the nature boys of D&D. I've seen two fairly common ways of them being presented when it comes to consumption of meat. I have a deep connection with animals, and I can't bring myself to eat meat as a result of my understanding of their soul. And the meat is natural, and I am a beast. I eat all the meats. In my own games, druids tend to be what I think the most natural state of man is. So you're farming, you're hunting, but you can see the perspectives being presented and how one might think about it from the context of you are attuned and aligned with nature itself. The arguments, I think, can be boiled down to if the druid sees himself as a guardian of the natural world or part of the natural world. If you're part of the natural world, eating meat is just an extension of that. While if you're a guardian of the natural world, it's not fulfilling my role in the process, as I'm protecting these animals from being destroyed. Additionally, if a druid is a vegan, it's not unrealistic that they would take steps towards preventing humans from hunting whenever appropriate. They might even do this while remaining hidden, convincing hunters that this area has been cursed. Maybe all the animals kind of drive out as the hunters come in, and they think that's kind of weird, so they stop hunting in that particular point of land. Or if the druid wants to have an active influence, they might even just try and convince villagers not to hunt in their area. And in many cases, they might get upset with hunters who are hunting too much in their area, because overhunting is a much bigger deal to druids, I think, than just regular hunting. Of course, none of this is extremely deep thought, but onto the part that gets a little wonky, just how sentient are animals compared to races in D&D. Now, I consider animals way below human in reality, but in D&D, among the stat blocks, there are some notable things to find. Giant owls, giant elk, and giant eagles all have a language while still being canonically beasts. Along with that, cannibalism isn't the pure determiner of whether or not you're off limits, because you have humans, then you have elves, then you have halflings, and they are all considered different, but you're not allowed to eat elf in most D&D settings. Of course, one where you're allowed to eat elves, but only if you're not an elf, would be quite fun, wouldn't it? I would also like to take a moment to observe monstrosities and beasts are different creature types, which we will discuss in more detail in a minute. For now, we're talking about beasts specifically. So when you come by one of these giant animals that has their own language and is capable of understanding you, are good characters still good if they eat them? Probably not. I would consider killing something that's fully capable of speech close enough to killing a human, especially in a setting where we consider dwarves and elves and whatnot and other species fully capable of speech as close enough to human, so you're probably not morally allowed to eat them. This is important because if we just use the humanoid classification, we wouldn't have had the problem of, okay, what makes these beasts different from these other beasts, to which right now we're going with speech because that's the most consistent line I can find. I like the worldviews of my characters being as fully consistent as possible, unless the inconsistency is a specific point of the character or the culture that we are messing with. And let's not forget awakened creatures, which were normal creatures given full sentience, normally by a druid, but I think there's some other spells or magic items that can cause it. They get to have speech and are equivalent to humans on a mental level. I imagine they would have quite the thoughts on meat eating as a concept if they were prey or raised for slaughter. It is worth noting that predators probably wouldn't have the same thoughts, and they might even just go about life as normal, but for now we're going to talk about prey. The ability to talk and attempt to reason with humans could very much affect how they view the world, and they might even consider themselves having a duty to spread word on the matter. I'm kinda imagining a sheep wandering through the land preaching about the evils of eating mutton and convincing farmers and maybe some other groups along the way to convert to vegetarianism. Though a sheep is a little bit of a funny choice because wool gets overgrown and needs to be sheared, meaning it does rely on man to a degree. And consider this with the sheep. A lot of deities request, or at the very least, receive animal sacrifices. Could you imagine the fun in a campaign where your party comes by a group of sheep trying to convince everyone that this god is evil when the only atrocity he has committed is against sheep? Could be a very fun situation. Though I might interject, not subscribing to this channel is also an atrocity. Do the thing. Please. I also wanted to discuss the Mia monsters for a bit. Now remember, there are categories of creatures. Humanoids are definitely off limits to most societies, I think, though exceptions might be made in exotic environments. Beasts, for the most part, are probably fine, ignoring those exceptions I just kind of discussed. But what's the deal with monstrosities? Well, what I normally think of when I consider this is, have you ever eaten bear meat? Chances are probably not, but a quick Bing search shows that eating it is a thing that happens, but a lot of bears have some parasites that are dangerous to humans, but not as harmful to bears, so you need to take some special steps when cooking it. I think it was 165 degrees Fahrenheit, if I'm not mistaken. I imagine a lot of monsters are in a similar vein on this matter. I think it makes a lot of sense that they would be more diseased. I have in one situation been a player in a game where a dragonborn really liked eating goblin flesh, which I suppose leads to the question, if non-sentient monster meat is probably fine morally, how should we feel about smart monster meat? I run inherently evil goblin games, so we are treating them as not humanoid, not etc. I do think eating them is a little weird. I think there's a degree of, I don't know, respect for those capable of thinking that needs to be in place. Language does seem to be the best point of reference in this matter. Moving on, let's not discount the possibility of some gods saying their followers can't eat meat. Consider this for your clerical characters or paladin characters. While I don't know a historical example of a blanket ban on meat consumption for followers of a given religion, assuming we're not counting being vegetarian as a religion, I do know about the kosher diet detailed in the Old Testament, in which they weren't allowed to eat specific types of animals based on some rules, and normally during fasting all meats weren't allowed because it was kind of a rich food and you were depriving yourself. And some of the New Testament Paul letters, they actually discuss what meats are allowed, being controversial to the early church. Even today, Catholics during Lent, I think that's what it's called, I'm not Catholic, will abstain from a lot of meat, but not fish, which, fun fact, is why McDonald's has the fish fillet. And while I veered off topic for a second there, I think it's fair to argue D&D religions could have similar or more serious eating regulations. There's also the possibility of holy animals, which have been explored a little with Drow, who considers spiders so sacred killing one by mistake needs the death penalty immediately, but I've not seen it explored much on other religions. But this is generally like 1 or 2 animals you aren't allowed to touch. I think there were some sort of special cows in Greek mythology, but I'm having trouble recalling it. Though I kind of like the concept of taking that and then going the complete reverse direction and having a holy animal provided as food no one else is allowed. So it's like, yeah, we can eat it because we're followers. You're not a follower. You ate it. We're killing you now because you disrespected our rules. And I can't think of a smooth transition, but one more point to be made is some D&D races could be carnivorous. I mentioned the co-player Dragonborn a little bit ago. He basically played his character as being unable to eat plants, so he was happy eating goblins, lizard folk, just about anything. So there's lots of thought to be had about meat eating. If you subscribed, I will see you next week with another thing I'm thinking about. Thank you for listening to a Dungeon Master's ramblings. It's been much fun. I got some lettuce for the thumbnail, and I had to put my mouth on it for the thumbnail, and this tastes disgusting, but I don't like wasting food.